There's a shelter pet who wants to meet you. Meet one today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org. Adopt.
Welcome to Community Spotlight. I'm your host, Leah Haslage. Today's Spotlight is on the 2020 Census. With us today is Director of City Planning for the City of Cleveland, Freddie Collier, and Steve Shope, who is, I want to get this right, the Supervisory Partnership Specialist with the U.S. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Census, Philadelphia Regional Census Center.
That's a mouthful.
Welcome,
Yes,
and welcome to Cleveland.
Thank you.
Let's start off by talking about what the census is, how it got created, and its purpose.
Sure. And it's an interesting story because, after we adopted the Declaration of Independence, we had the Articles of Confederation, basically. And for 10 years, that's what served our country. But, by 1787, it wasn't working out. They were fearful that our nation wouldn't survive. And so they had the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, right just a block down the street from our office. And their main point of discussion was, what does Congress look like? Because there was a single House of Congress and people were determining, should it be equal representation or should it be based on population? And they were divided over that topic. And then a delegate from Connecticut had this idea called the Great Compromise. What if we had two houses of Congress and one was based on equal representation and the other based on population? So unanimously adopted it, and when they wrote the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1 says legislative powers in two houses. Article 1, Section 2 says in order to do that, you got to have a census every 10 years. So it's that important that it was the backbone of representational democracy in America.
Why do you think people are so skeptical about filling it out?
I think people are fearful of government in general. The political climate is such that people are skeptical about people in their household, the numbers of individuals who are living under one roof and have to because of very challenging circumstances. I think when you look at the fact that you have quite a bit of immigration happening and the tone of Washington nowadays, I think it's going to exacerbate the concerns that people have. I also think that people are just all around skeptical about sharing their personal information. And really the big challenge before us is going to be, how do you get people to understand, A, the importance of filling out the census information and how it's going to impact their quality of life. And it's really going to require us to be very sensitive, very hands-on, and very communicative with respect to dispelling a lot of those fears.
You're talking about current times, and a big current topic with census is the citizenship question. Do you think that having it on the census for 2020 is going to change your response rate with people being fearful of answering that question?
Yeah. So it's hard to speculate on how people will feel about it if, in fact, it ends up on the questionnaire. But, from our perspective internally at the Census Bureau, we know that the data is secure. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do. And as Freddie alluded to, this whole idea of, people are fearful, they have concerns. And at the same time, the general public doesn't really understand the importance of the census. So if we can educate them on the importance and relieve some of their concerns, regardless of what questions are on there, we think people will be more apt to respond. And, there are, for instance, one of our partnership specialists here in Cleveland, Nada, as you met, is working directly with the immigrant community to be able to address some of those things. And, herself having been an immigrant to America, knows the process, can speak candidly with these folks. And the meetings that we've been to already have been productive. And I can tell you just along the lines, our messaging was, encouraging them to respond, but we had some good meetings recently with some key stakeholders in the immigrant community who said, we're as much interested in this time around because of the online capabilities. You're able to select, your ethnicity from a large list, and they're actually excited that they're going to be represented accurately for the first time ever. Yeah. So there are some positive sides to this.
So then, are you working with Global Cleveland? Because I know they're one of our big organizations here.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So Global Cleveland, we're working right now on our Complete Count Committee We actually have the first Complete Count Committee meeting coming up next week. Mayor Jackson, as well as the council president, are extremely involved and very excited about this, but very serious about it because they understand the implications. One thing that Stephen alluded to that's really important is that issue of trust and communication, and having community members who are respected, who understand the census, communicate with other community members, is really going to be key for us. And I think in Cleveland we have a pretty good infrastructure by which we can actually touch people. And we're in an age now where engagement is extremely dynamic. You know, it's not one-dimensional. It's not just the community meeting, but it's the social media. It's all of those layers that we have to touch. It's almost like we're going to have to run this like a political campaign.
And with what's going on nationally, you kind of really need to make sure people in our community locally understand that they don't need to be fearful.
That's right.
Now, how do you reach the hard-to-reach population?
So in many respects, with hard-to-count populations, you have to meet people where they are. And just let me give you an example of some things that we did in the 2010 census. We hosted a concert here in Public Auditorium as a way to kind of hook people in to the concert, but also promote the message of the census. There were things that we did out in the neighborhood with respect to events. We literally had blown up examples of the actual census form and actually gave out, trinkets and other things to talk to people and get them familiar with it. We hosted a website 10 years ago so that people could actually go to the website where they had frequently asked questions and you had very clear, clean responses. We also put the mayor on social media, even back then with our website, and was able to have him sort of articulate the importance of the census. So we understand that we have to have a lot of different touch points. It's not one-dimensional, and the greater that we can cast our net, the greater potential for the response is.
Definitely.
And we also have some pretty amazing data that we can pair with that. So we have this tool called Roam, and it's public, available. The public can see it on the internet, census.gov/Roam. But we work with our complete count committees because Roam is an interactive map, and you can zoom in on Cuyahoga County, you can zoom in on the city of Cleveland, see the individual census tracts, and we have them color-coded based on low response scores that we project. And then by clicking on one of those tracks, you get a full demographic profile. So in looking at that data, we're able to identify what we know are commonly hard to count populations. So we're able to be strategic in that messaging as well. It's not just general. We're doing some very strategic messaging and outreach to the communities that are projected to be low response.
Speaking about going online, the census is moving to become electronic. So how do you help those that don't have a computer or computer illiterate, maybe? How do you reach out to them?
Sure. So, I mean, this time around, there's a big push for people to go online because it gives them a lot more options. Drop-down menus provide, expanded capabilities, but also the cost savings is enormous. When people don't respond to the census, our final operation is called non-response follow-up, and that's when people go out knocking on doors to complete the survey for you. So the more people respond up front, the less that happens. But as much as we're pushing the online, they'll still have the options of doing it over the phone, or the paper form will also come in the mail.
Oh, good. So there's
Yes.
so many different ways you can do it.
Yep.
And the one thing I like to highlight too with mobile devices, regardless of their social economic status, everybody has them.
Yeah.
So it may really yield us an opportunity to have a much deeper reach than before. So the technology can be a vice and a virtue, we think.
Definitely. Now, I know a lot of people are wondering, what does the census do for us? Like, how does it benefit our city? So how does it?
So having everyone be counted is important because that is how funding from the federal level is allocated. Cities that have larger populations obviously get more resources because it takes resources to run cities. Also, with respect to elected representation, as Stephen alluded to earlier, when you talk about representation, the more people you have, the more representation that you have. And having an undercount can really do a disservice because it can impact the city financially, but it can also impact you negatively on the representation front. And Lord knows we need our representation in DC to advocate for cities.
Okay, well, I know we have much more to dive into, but we're going to take a quick break. So don't change that channel. We'll be right back with more Community Spotlight.
1 in 6 seniors faces the threat of hunger, and millions more live in isolation.
America, let's do lunch.
Drop off a hot meal and say a quick hello. Volunteer for Meals on Wheels by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org.
Welcome back to Community Spotlight. I'm your host, Leah Haslage. Today's Spotlight is on the 2020 Census, and with us is Director of City Planning for the City of Cleveland, Freddie Collier, and Steve Shope, who is the Supervisory Partnership Specialist with the U.S. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Census, Philadelphia Regional Census Center. Welcome back, guys. So we were just talking about the benefits that the city has based off the census, but now let's talk about how that information that you guys collect is used, because I'm sure, especially with things like credit cards and things that are going on these days, people are worried, like, are you selling it to third parties?
So the answer to that is no, obviously. However, for the city and for civic purposes, much of the data that we get to plan neighborhoods, to look at demographic statistics, those are very important pieces of information for strategy and planning. And the census is really the baseline for a lot of that information. Much of what we use it for, just from a development planning perspective, is really trying to figure out how do we begin to plan for housing for seniors. We need to know how many seniors are in a community. So understanding from a demographic standpoint, how many older persons exist in the area. Understanding the age characteristics of a place so that you can actually provide the services needed for that particular community. So the data is used in a number of different ways for decision making on the ground here with respect to local government.
Yeah, and that dovetails even into the nonprofit world. Nonprofits are writing grants and developing programming based on the needs of their community and based on the demographics of their population. So it does really impact. And it's not a coincidence that throughout the 9 states we serve, and certainly throughout the country, complete count committees often are either led by or are at least very strongly supported by the planning department, because they speak the language in spades. So I'm a business economic development consultant myself, and I heavily rely on this data. And it's interesting that you can see, even down to something so basic as to the products that a Costco carries in one city as opposed to what they carry in another city,
that makes sense,
is based on census data. So,
does that change redistricting lines as well?
It does have an impact on that as well.
And to really clarify that, because people often come to us at the Census Bureau and talk about how we've changed their districts. Our data is collected and it's used as the basis, but it is the local municipalities that are through the process using the data to delineate maps and figure out what their districts. We do not determine the districts, we just provide the data for them to do so, yes. Because it becomes the gospel for all things in America. Federal government uses the census for their funding, the municipalities use it for redistricting, nonprofits. It's just that steady, sturdy, consistent, reliable information that you can bank on.
Now, the U.S. Census Bureau has decreased its funding for the 2020 census. How does that impact you when it comes to collecting data?
Yeah, I love that question, because it's kind of become just a skewed news story that when people say the budget's been slashed and things like that. Right. So, the budget for the census, the decennial census, was growing exponentially with every 10 years. But this time we've employed a lot more technology. In 2010, we started out trying to deploy technology into field operations. It was quickly abandoned because there were a lot of things that just weren't ready yet. This time around, the technology, the networks, everything is fully there, it's fully capable. And so we've reduced a lot of just expenses we're reducing the number of offices, the number of staff for operations. For instance, our first operation in the field will begin this summer. And it's a fraction of the size that it was in 2010, because a lot of that work is being done using geospatial imagery.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You're not going door to door anymore.
So
yeah.
It really does reduce it. But just in case anybody has any concerns that the budget was slashed and there's not enough funding to do this, I'll say this. A budget was presented to Congress. Congress approved the budget based on those efficiencies. Even after the fact, the Secretary of the Department of Commerce went to Congress and said, we think we under-budgeted, we need more money, and they awarded him the money he asked for.
Oh, wow.
So there's certainly no question. We don't feel understaffed or underfunded, or we fully, in addition to that, in addition to what we do in our own vacuum, these complete count committees, these people in the communities that are stepping up have changed the dynamics of the decennial census, because it is like a fleet of people who have far more influence and impact in their communities than any government official can have.
Wow.
And it's changing the game, and we expect to have a full and accurate census in
That's
2020.
exciting.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll outdo past census numbers of people participating?
Well, given the technology, I think that gives us a further reach, but also the challenges are still ever present, right? But I think to what Steve alluded to, we have to be very aggressive on the ground. I think that our participation, for example, in LUCA, which is the local updated census addresses, making sure that as our geographic environment change, I know we've had a lot of demolitions in the city of Cleveland.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of new developments going on, higher density, multiple family units, and making sure that the addresses are correct and the information that we have is correct, so that when the connection's made with those troops that the U.S. Census are going to be sending out, we have that accurate address information. So that's something that occurred last year, all right, in preparation for the census. So we participated in that. The other piece that I think is extremely important for us with making that connection is really helping people sort of to understand how they need to interface and the opportunities they have to interface. That throughout the summer, throughout the fall, and many of the promotional things that people are going to be inundated with and see in their environment frequently is really going to help to sort of bridge that gap. Philanthropy is also going to be very important for us, the resources that philanthropic organizations are able to provide. So I think in aggregate, working from the federal, state, and local, and everyone teaming up, it's really a sort of all hands on deck approach. And if we are successful at operating and working together, I think we'll have a pretty good census.
Now, I'm thinking about it with you talking about like the demolition of homes and people moving. If someone fills out the census but then ends up moving for whatever reason, maybe they weren't planning on it, do they need to then refill out the census with their new address? Does that impact the other?
Yeah.
Like, how does it impact?
So we get a lot of questions that are at least related around that topic. And what happens is April 1st, 2020 is Census Day. So you might get your mailings about responding to the census as early as middle of March in advance. Whether you fill it out middle of March, April 1st, or even if you wait 2 months after and you're even into July filling out your form, it's asking you who lived in this house on April 1st, 2020.
Okay.
So that's the moment in time for which the data is captured. Yes.
Yeah. So we spoke earlier about the Citizenship Question and working with Global Cleveland. Do you have a way for people that maybe have language barriers to be able to participate?
Yes, and it's a combination of things. We have partnership specialists in the field, and even in the city of Cleveland, we'll be hiring a Spanish-speaking partnership specialist. Throughout our 9-state region, we have a few other languages that we can deploy for certain things. So we'll be able to utilize those internal resources. But part of the partnership program and the CCC and developing the relationships and the outreach will be to identify people in the communities, A, for jobs, because we want to hire people within each community, and also then to use those organizations to help overcome those barriers by having sessions where they can walk people through their forms and things like that. So yes, we are totally trying to address it from all angles.
Speaking of organizations, what additional organizations are you working with to help assist with this whole process?
Sure. So next week, we invited over 100 people to participate in this Complete Count Committee kickoff. Most Complete Count committees represent a cross-section of organizations, from faith-based organizations, community development organizations, philanthropy, and Cleveland, we have a very robust system of agencies and networks, and we believe that our infrastructure is going to be key for us. Cleveland Foundation, folks from there were invited, folks from numerous churches around town. So we think that we touch all the bases with respect to outreach and getting people excited and beginning that process of getting people excited about the census.
And there are, the larger organizations, but even, just yesterday, my colleague Nada and I were at the Ukrainian Museum in Tremont.
Oh, yes.
And it was an amazing experience, but and he's where he elevated this idea of, they're excited and he's excited to communicate with his people that for the first time ever they've been previously guesstimating how many Ukrainians were in the area, And if he can get everybody to respond and select Ukrainian, that they're going to have, for the first time ever, a good representation and feel fully represented in their community. So.
And we're so multicultural here in Cleveland, and there's so many cultural centers to reach out to get involved, which is extra great.
It is,
yeah.
It is. And so, we have a complete count committee the city of Cleveland is hosting. Sometimes the counties host them. Cuyahoga County is going to have a separate complete count committee. And often they're government-led, but we are also in the process of developing a regional complete count committee for the immigrant community, so that we are really leveraging the strengths of those leaders in those communities. So we're excited about that.
And cultural gardens, that's a great one too.
It's been brought up so many times.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yes. Yes.
So what do you think is the biggest misconception about the census?
I think, for one, that the information will be misused. When you think about technology, technology is so broad. And I think people have a definite fear about people being able to obtain their information in ways that they couldn't obtain it before. I think from my perspective, I think that technology piece is an asset, but at the same time, it adds a layer of complexity.
Yeah, and what we see too is we go into a community or we're having meetings with the organizational stakeholders, not only being able to really relay the importance of the census, but in a way that they see the benefit to them specifically. So to walk into a group that serves children and say, these are WIC benefits, these are SNAP, these are child care, Head Start. I mean, to be able to really, and you can tie, exactly, you can tie federal funding to just about anything. It really impacts everybody. And then as Freddie said, really the security of the data. Not only is it constitutionally protected, there's no way this data, but like he outlined earlier, we're talking about federal government working with state leaders, working with local leaders. If someone's going to betray your trust with your data, they are betraying all of those people in that chain, and that's just simply not going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's the foundation of our democracy. If we lose trust in this, it would not be a good direction to go in.
Yes. Anything else you think people should know about the upcoming 2020 census?
I think that it's a very important endeavor, and I would encourage people to take it extremely seriously. Just as sure as we have to go to the polls and vote, I think we need to make sure that we fill out those forms so that that representation can be there for the purposes we've outlined in this conversation.
Yeah, and I would add too that this, for me personally, I think it's one of the few things, unless you're one of those bold people that can serve in the military, very few of us ever have an opportunity to serve in Congress. But every 10 years, literally people from all walks of life get to take part in this thing that our founding fathers have left for us. And it's really one of the only things left that really everybody, regardless of your race, ethnicity, education, background, in every community in America, you can not only participate and respond to the census, you can get a job and work for the census. And it's inclusive. It really is. And it's amazing to be part of that legacy of our founding fathers.
That, like you said, voting.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's what we can do.
Yes.
Now, how do we get more information about the census and if they want to volunteer or work?
So we're going to be launching a website that we're going to announce next week at the Complete Count Committee kickoff, working with our stakeholders. The U.S. Census has its own website currently. One thing I do want to add about this is that it's very important for cities, and we were talking about this as we were walking over, to cities to own the census. Stephen brought up a great point. It's not necessarily us coming and saying, hey, we need your help. It's from the federal perspective. It's really, hey, we're here to help you. This is yours. You need to own it. And that's very important. It's something we took seriously 10 years ago, and it's something we're going to continue to take seriously.
And the 2020 Census.gov website's been up for a little bit, but it officially launches in April, and it'll be available. They'll be able to click in 26 languages. So,
oh, great.
Yes.
And social media as well, I'm sure.
Yes, you can follow it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You name it, it's there.
It's there.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here. We really appreciate it. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers have as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you so much for tuning into Community Spotlight. As always, you can find this information and more at our website, tv20cleveland.com. I'm Leah Haslage. Till next time.